there's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters this podcast was recorded on. Hi, True Crime Conversations listeners. It's your host, Gemma, and I'm jumping back into your ears today to share an important episode with you. It's from Mamamia's news podcast, The Quickie, hosted by Clare Murphy. She spoke to me for a recent episode investigating whether there is a Byron Bay serial killer on the loose right now. People are starting to connect the dots between multiple cases of women going missing or being murdered in the Byron and New South Wales coastal areas, including women with their own first-hand accounts. You may have seen these women on TikTok and Instagram while you've been scrolling. And in this episode, Claire and I talk about how likely it is that all of these cases and run-ins are actually linked. Let us know what you think of the episode, and I'll see you next week for another True Crime Conversation.
Hi, I'm Clare Murphy. This is Mamamia's twice daily news podcast, The Quickie. We all love a bit of true crime, right? It's weirdly soothing listening to stories of horrible things happening to someone else somewhere else. But what if that true crime gets a little too close to home?
Like, I looked at this man and I felt terror.
There's a theory being floated that the worst serial killer in Australian history could be behind dozens of missing and murdered New South Wales women. And there are some first-hand accounts from those who feel they might have even been a potential target. Today, we look at the alarming similarity of more than 60 unsolved crimes and wonder if they might all be linked. Last month, Melbourne woman Kaylee was walking alone in the northern New South Wales suburb of Suffolk Park. It was around 4 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon and she was going to meet friends at the beach when a car, all of a sudden, pulled up beside her.
As I'm walking, there is a car that pulls up like on the other side of the parked cars to me. They're in the middle of the road. I look into the car and it's a young couple, and the woman in the passenger seat, she's looking at me and then she's looking behind me at something and she looks terrified. And I was like, what on earth is going on? So I look behind me to see a man a couple of meters behind me. And this man does not look dressed for where we are. It's like 30 degrees and he is in gloves, which I thought was really freaky. Like, I looked at this man and I felt terror. The thing is for that man to be as close to me as he was, he had to have run up on me because I had already been checking behind me because I'm just like that type of person. As soon as I look at him, he disappears either like down this side street or like into somebody's front yard. I wouldn't have even noticed this man if not for the fact that the couple in the car were distressed and they'd pulled over. Every single part of me felt like that was a really, really close encounter with something really evil.
Kaylee says she informed local police, but found them to be dismissive of her experience. Her TikTok comment section, though, was flooded with similar experiences. Experiences like Laura Clare's. Laura is a Byron Bay local who's been documenting her run-ins and info about the alleged Byron Bay serial killer. Laura, can you talk us through that day where you and your friend decided to go hitchhiking?
Yeah, sure. I think Byron has this hold on people. It's just this idealistic kind of town, and there's a lot of people hitchhiking there, and you just have this sense of safety. Well, I did when I first went there, obviously. So my friend and I needed to get from Byron to Suffolk. It was a really hot day. I suggested that we hitchhike. She had never hitchhiked before and was very much against it, and I kind of convinced her it wasn't a very long distance and it was safe and all the things that I shouldn't have said, all the things that I felt a sense of safety that I shouldn't have felt. So we go to hitch a ride and this van pulls up. He's so normal looking, I can barely remember his details, and he seemed to look very friendly as well. So my friend, I put her in the back and I went to sit in the front, and there was a big knife on the front seat. And not having any survival instincts at all, I just grabbed the knife and put it on the floor to get in. And I think I even asked him permission to do so. And then I kind of just out of curiosity was like, oh, what's the knife for? And he said that he was a chef. And that's kind of when I started to feel uncomfortable. Most people would have felt uncomfortable hitchhiking. This is where I started to feel uncomfortable. The knife was very rusty. The knife did not look like it should go anywhere near food. It just kind of started mulling in my mind, and I said, "Oh, where are you a chef?" Because I thought maybe I'd know the restaurant or know, just get some comfort in knowing that he worked around the area. And he said, "Oh, I'm not working at the moment." And that's when I just went, okay, I don't feel comfortable here. We need to get out of this situation. And so I said, "Oh, yep, that's us just up there." He let us out of the van, like we got out of the van. So that was my experience. And honestly, I don't think I even thought about it again after that day for a long time. But a few friends of mine have contacted me in the last couple of days and said, "Oh, you told me about that story." So it has sort of stuck with me, but not as much as it probably should have.
Well, can you explain what happened after you shared that story publicly? Because we've seen this happen with other women too in the area who've shared their close encounters, that it's essentially kind of opened up the floodgates.
It absolutely has, and it's quite distressing. In my mind, I was going to share this story about what happened. I was either going to have people going, "You're overreacting," or people going, "Oh my God, that was really scary." I didn't prepare myself for hundreds of women coming forward speaking about it, close call encounters, rapes, drink spikings, names of people that are dangerous in the area. I just wasn't prepared for the volume. I wasn't prepared for the horrific details. And it's just so alarming. And at times I felt defeated because I'm like, how do we help? How do we change this? What do we do? Obviously, my first point is to call the police and report what you know. But in a lot of these cases, they were actually let down by the police in either not showing up on scene, taking too long to get to the scene where they were no longer in danger, saying that they didn't have enough information, not taking down details, telling them to go home when they went into the station, distressed, all of that kind of stuff as well.
This is something that a lot of women come up against when it comes to crimes against them like this and another of its nature, is that police are so under-resourced. These are sometimes put in the too hard basket, especially when there's many, many of them to look at. But I think what we have realised when yourself and others who are also looking at crimes against women like this in the area where you live is that when you start to map this out, that map starts to look very crowded, doesn't it? Like if you were to pin all of these instances to a real physical map, there'd be no space in between.
And look, this has been common knowledge among locals for years. And I think one of the biggest things that kind of is terrifying is these are maps of women that have gone missing or died. It would be interesting to see a map of women that have been assaulted, because what I've heard in the last 72 hours is a lot of assaults and people that didn't die but are left with the consequences of this. And these can often be behaviours in the lead up to worse crimes. Some of these haven't been reported or weren't reported, or it's interesting with a lot of this information, women, when they haven't reported it, I've asked them why. And there's quite a common thread of young women being worried that they were going to get in trouble with their parents for not being where they were supposed to. And so I think that there's a lot of information out there that we're not getting through to the legal system either. But in the case of the map and how many crimes happen in this area, it is unbelievably high. And when you're going to a town like Byron and you don't live there, you have this kind of view of it, like I did, that it was just this sleepy coastal town. And so when you have that view of a town, you're walking around doing things that you do on holiday that you probably wouldn't do at home, and you're not really fearing for your safety or being concerned about it at all, because you're not hearing about it on the news and you're not realising actually that you may be in danger. Like I had a friend of mine that lives in Byron and I was talking to her about it and she said, "I'd rather walk around alone in the Cross or Redfern than I would in Byron." It's well known by the locals, and I think, Kaylee, the other girl that spoke out about it, she kind of got attacked and shut down when she first came out about it. And a lot of that was by the locals. You don't want to try that with me because I've lived there and I can name, incidences that happen and people that have gone missing, and no one from the community has tried to say to me, no, it's not. No, it didn't happen. Because if you live there, you know. It's very easy to shut down a girl from Melbourne that was visiting a week because she just had this bad experience and she had a very off feeling about it. But if you live there, you know. Trying to cover it up for the sake of tourism or house prices or whatever it is actually doing the town a disservice.
Laura, you said that when the hitchhiking incident happened, you kind of dismissed it and almost essentially forgot about it until now. Would you say the same thing now with all the responses that you got to it and all the stories that you've heard? Do you feel like that has now changed you where that hitchhiking incident didn't?
It's interesting because the hitchhiking incident, when I think about it at a core level, did change me. I hitchhiked once again after that, but I was in a very desperate situation. I remember thinking I shouldn't be doing this. So it did change me at that level, but what it's kind of changed for me now as a woman, especially after speaking out about this, is just how careful I need to be. Like I was walking my dog yesterday and I just went, wow, like I'm not as aware of my surroundings as I should be, and maybe I need to be more careful in a lot of other areas of my life, because after hearing the things that I did and reading what I have in the last 72 hours, it's pretty bleak.
While Laura is thanking her lucky stars that she and her friend didn't find themselves potentially in the path of a killer, there are potentially more than 60 others who weren't so lucky. Last week, New South Wales MP Jeremy Buckingham addressed State Parliament, stating that the worst serial killer in the nation's history has gotten away with it.
Ivan Milat was convicted of 7 murders. There is someone on the North Coast that has murdered as many or more, and they are still amongst us. 67, the numbers of unsolved homicides of women on the North Coast of New South Wales, and it has every indication that someone operated in that area, travelled that area, lived across that area and took women, destroyed their bodies, destroyed their lives, and it's appalling that it's taken so long for this matter to come before the House and to public attention.
Buckingham told Parliament that he's been called alarmist because his view and the view of some senior police, like Detective Gary McAvoy, who investigated these matters from Coffs Harbour, is that they were and are linked. He, with the support of Greens MP Sue Higginson, has called on the Premier Chris Minns to hold a special commission of inquiry, but that has been rejected amid suggestions a new police task force be set up to investigate the unsolved cases instead. According to a Daily Telegraph investigation, there are 67 women who've been murdered or who've gone missing in the area over the last 30 years. They include a number of disappearances around Newcastle in the 1970s. Gemma Barth is Mamamia's news editor and host of the True Crime Conversations podcast. Gemma, these cases go back as far as the 1970s. Can you give us a rundown of some of those older cases that they think might be the work of this serial killer?
Yeah, and so they kind of spread all the way up the coast. We're talking from like Coffs Harbour to up to kind of the Gold Coast area. But there does seem to be a concentration around Newcastle, which is one of the biggest centres along that coast, if you know the area. And many of the disappearances or alleged murders in that area are from the 70s. So we've got 18-year-old Robin Hickey. She was last seen at a bus stop in April 1979. 8 months after that, 14-year-old Amanda Robinson. She vanished while walking home near Swansea. The following year, 17-year-old Annie and 18-year-old Joy, they both went missing after a night out at a club in the city, so in Newcastle again. There's Narelle Cox. She was 21. She was last seen in Grafton in 1977. She actually left a note for her family and it read, "Gone to Noosa to see Faye, be back on Monday," which is just heartbreaking, isn't it? A truck driver said he picked her up and actually dropped her in Brunswick Heads and she's never been seen again. Then we've got Rose Howell. She was 18, went missing in 2003, about 25 kilometres from Coffs Harbour. Susan Marie Keeley, she was 33. She's been missing from Bellingen on the mid-north coast since 1989. Her body's never been found. I could go on and on and on. There's literally dozens of cases.
But Gemma, are we just seeing patterns when there might not be one? You know how humans really like to seek patterns and find those kind of things that look linked when really they might not be? Why are we thinking that all of these have a connection?
When you think about the string that's linking all of these cases, women who have gone missing while hitchhiking or walking or travelling to another place, that's obviously a very broad term, But I don't think that doesn't mean it's not a pattern, particularly when you consider the fact that when you compare how many women have gone missing along the stretch of the New South Wales coastline, you just don't see that kind of concentration of missing and murdered women anywhere else in the country, anywhere, for that kind of population, geography, that span of time. To give you an example, in the whole of Tasmania, there's less than 10 cases, and we're talking over 60 in this one area.
Why is this only being discussed now, though? We mentioned some of these cases date back more than 30 years. Why now?
Because technology, forensics, investigative techniques, they've come so far in the last few years alone. I mean, we're learning new things every day. A lot of these cases weren't thoroughly investigated or properly investigated at the time, sometimes because they just didn't have the resources or the technology to do so. I mean, we're seeing so many cold cases being solved. One that comes to mind recently is the Easy Street murders in Melbourne. That was from 1977. And that is a really highly publicised case. You know, everyone in Melbourne knows that story. The two Sues that were murdered in their house, a little boy that was left crying in the middle of their dead bodies. Horrific story. They've got a man in custody all these years later, decades later, because of DNA that is now able to be traced and tracked back to people all these decades later. So I think the reason that we're talking about it now is because some of these cases need to be reinvestigated with fresh 2024 eyes, because you never know what you're going to find. You're never going to know what we're going to be able to solve with everything that's at our fingertips. And we also know so much more about serial offenders now than we did back then. We've just got so much more knowledge in the police force. So we definitely need to go back. We need to go back and look at these cases with fresh eyes.
Well, speaking of the police force, obviously these are cold cases and cold cases are never officially closed, but as you mentioned, they might not be being investigated to the extent that we would hope or that we would presume that they are investigated, especially if they're beyond 30 years old. But obviously New South Wales Police know more than any of us about all of these cases. What have they said about this alleged linking of all of them?
They have released a statement. It's not as exciting as you might expect. It says there is no evidence to indicate a common offender was responsible for the disappearance. They've said that the matters remain under investigation by the State Crime Command's Homicide Squad Unsolved Homicide Team, that's a mouthful, and the Missing Person Registry as part of, recent recommendations that were handed down by a Special Commission of Inquiry. So they're reviewing all unsolved cases every 2 years, which is amazing. It does mean each of these cases are getting fresh eyes, but there are so many cases. So we've just got to hope that they're getting the attention that they deserve.
We don't want to alarm people, but we do want to arm them. So if you find yourself along the New South Wales northern coast, please be careful and be aware of your surroundings. Laura says she wants women to know, though, that their experiences aren't just fine and to ignore the gaslighting that comes with reporting them.
I've noticed people were more likely to come to me than they were to call Crime Stoppers. And that is us systematically as women being taught that, it's probably nothing, you're being over-dramatic, you're overreacting, you're being hysterical. And so even with me, with the incident in 2008, I played it down to, well, he let me out of the van so he couldn't be. Well, Ivan Milat let a lot of people out of his car too. So we kind of gaslight ourselves, and we also go to people who are meant to help us that also gaslight us and make us feel like we're being idiots. And so I think that needs to change. I think that there needs to be a safe space to be able to discuss these issues. And what I wanted to achieve, often we hear these different separate stories, but this is hundreds of women and hundreds of close calls that you're seeing in these comment section. And maybe when you see that volume all together, you start to realise, okay, this is a really big issue. Can we get it now? We need to do something about this. Women aren't feeling safe.
Thanks for taking the time to feed your mind with us today. The Quickie is produced by me, Clare Murphy, and our executive producer, Taylah Strano, with audio production by Tegan Sadler.